Welcome to the discussion. My guests today, Lance Spencer, the Client Executive Vice President for the Air Force at AT&T Public Sector. Lance, welcome to the discussion.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Bill Lancey, the Client Executive Vice President for Navy and Marine Corps at AT&T Public Sector. Bill, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for hosting us.
And Jamie Gatto, the Client Executive Director for Navy Enterprise Networks for AT&T Public Sector. Jamie, welcome to the discussion.
Thanks for having us.
SDN has a lot of different kinds of applicability, and Jamie, you'll probably talk some more about this, I know, but one thing that I think is important to think about with software-defined networking and network function virtualization goes hand in hand. The ability through software to change the configuration of the network and the routing and the delivery of the network very agilely, very much real time, is the control plane and the orchestration. And so without those pieces, you can buy a box that claims to be SDN capable, but if you don't have the brain behind the SDN and the delivery through the orchestration, you really have a box that does SDN. So you've got to have all of that built in. And we're one of the few networks that really does have that built in. Now it's rapidly becoming the global standard how we do orchestration. We contributed our orchestration software, which we developed through AT&T, to the open source through the Linux Foundation. So it's available and other carriers are adopting it. But it's not trivial if you're not a carrier, if you're not a global delivery platform, to bring that orchestration in at the scale that the DoD needs it.
And just real quick, define orchestration for me.
So orchestration, and I usually talk about both automation and orchestration as two things that go together. So if you think about software-defined networking as being sort of the underlying platform that says, hey, this box could be a router, it could be a switch, it could be a firewall, and depending on what commands I send to it, that actually defines in software how that thing is going to act on the network. On top of that, we layer network function virtualization, right, which is literally taking what used to be a specific hardware device, right? This box is a firewall, right, and saying, hey, really the firewall is just a bunch of software code that happens to be running on that box. If I virtualize that, the same way we virtualize servers in the data center, and put that onto a commodity box, well, now that single box can be a router and a firewall and do switching and potentially do WAN acceleration. So that gives us software-defined networking and network function virtualization. And both of those things are wonderful, right? We can save space, weight, and power. We can reduce footprint. We can significantly reduce the cost of installation and maintenance. Upgrades are much easier, obviously, when you don't have to go out and touch boxes to go from one version of the software to another.
Supply chain and logistics.
Supply chain and logistics. So all of that is wonderful. But when you bring in the automation and orchestration capability, that's what really makes this thing sing. Right, so orchestration is the capability for someone sort of centrally located to reach in and make a change to the entire network. So some of the use cases that I like to think about are maybe sort of niche cases, but in the military sense, you'll understand why this becomes important. Let's say that there's a new vulnerability that gets announced on one vendor's firewalls or routers, and that happens to be the vendor that's installed everywhere within the Navy. That's a hard thing to deal with, right? If suddenly all of our firewalls or all of our routers have got this vulnerability, all we can do is sit and wait until the vendor comes out with a patch. In an orchestrated, software-defined, network function virtualized environment, I can just change that, right? I can grab a different vendor's product, I can push it into the network and have it globally replace all of those potentially vulnerable devices with devices that don't suffer from that vulnerability. Orchestration can also work in an automatic or semi-automatic mode, right, where it notices that changes have happened on the network and can alter the way that services are being provided, right? So we think about quality of service. Internet protocol networking does a really good job of routing around problems, right? But ultimately, if I lose a box somewhere and there were services on that box, they're gone, right? I can't reconstitute that. Orchestration can notice that those services have gone away, find another place in the network to reconstitute those services, bring them back up, tell the entire network where those services are now, reroute all the traffic, and potentially reduce the impact to the user. And back to quality of service, if it wasn't working on one path, right? Maybe I need to pick that service up and move it closer to the user. Maybe my user patterns have changed or changed throughout the day, and I'd like to shift those services to follow along with them. Those are all made available through orchestration.
You bring up several different points. You bring up the agility that SDN brings. You bring up the flexibility and the visibility. We're going to go with a lot of abilities, but the most important, I think, is cybersecurity. And I think your example is good. If you have a firewall that has a problem, you can change it out. You can fix it more easily. You don't have to go in and figure out, okay, where are all these firewalls located? Is that the biggest benefit, though, for the DoD when it comes to SDN, is the cybersecurity piece, or is it that's one of many? It's a tough question.
It is a tough question. I guess it depends on who you ask. It is definitely one of many. The cybersecurity practitioners out there are probably going to say that the cyber capabilities are the number one importance out there. Like Lance, I served in uniform for a long time doing communications for the Navy. As a network operator, I would say making sure that the users get the services that they need is the most important capability. The users usually would agree with that. But these things are, I guess the most important thing here is that historically, those things have been a trade-off. That cybersecurity and operations, you often had to choose one over the other, right? The most secure network is the disconnected one, right? But that's not particularly useful. A completely wide open network is certainly not going to get in the user's way, at least as long as it's able to stay up and uncompromised. But we don't necessarily have to balance, or the balance between the two is significantly changed, right? I can be much more flexible in how I deliver things. I can structure the security controls, whether temporally or locationally, to meet the specific, whether it's the cyber threat environment or the operational environment, to balance those off as we move along. It's no longer whatever was originally in the accreditation package is the only way this thing is ever going to exist. I can now actually apply the risk management framework operationally to look at where my operational risk is versus my cyber risk and adjust those things dynamically.
And here's what's really helpful, I think. So, the Air Force and probably all the DoD is struggling with the force they have versus the force they need. It's a manpower discussion. And a lot of people are out doing compliance actions right now, out on the field, checking boxes, checking configurations. Is this a pirated box, pirated device, pirated something? Is it configured properly? All those things they're looking at. That manpower can be reallocated to more critical warfighting missions, because modern networks with the modern visibility will give them those compliance reports real time through software.
One of the things when we talk about SDN, and Jamie mentioned it a little bit, is the cybersecurity benefits and the ability to put in patches, make changes on the fly. Bill, lead us off and talk a little bit about this idea of AT&T and the investments you guys are making and why cybersecurity is such a key piece to SDN.
Okay, let me start off by saying that securing mission-critical information for the DoD is a daunting task, considering the number of defense agencies and the volumes of classified and unclassified data. With the movement of edge data to the cloud, the attack surface is increasing with increased number of exposure points, wider threat planes. Threat vectors are becoming more and more complex. The consequences of hacks and security breaches, which we're seeing almost on an all too frequent basis on the news and we're seeing on TV, is costly. So the job of the chief security officer is to get it right and get it right the first time. AT&T has kind of a two-pronged approach to cybersecurity. We have an approach from the outside in and an approach from the inside out. The approach from the outside in is based on a view that we have to large amounts of internet data crossing our network, and that's with our Threat Insights solution. From the inside out, that's our Unified Security Manager solution, where we can orchestrate, aggregate, and manage security threats. So Jamie, can you talk to those solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Threat Insights capability, that outside in functionality that we have, as Bill mentioned, comes from our role as a global carrier. I'm sure that you guys have heard the numbers. The last time I checked, it was more than 260 petabytes a day of data that we move. And when you move that much data, you get to see things that an individual customer is simply never going to see. We can see patterns of conduct across the entire internet that allows us to see, for instance, a denial of service attack or a pattern of denial of service attacks that hasn't even gotten to us yet that we can then take action on. Right, so the tie-in to SDN on that side, on the Threat Insights side of it, is that we can see things that are happening and we can make those software-defined changes in our network so that the customer never knows that there's a problem. right? We can literally, whether it's denial of service mitigation or simply black hole routing of traffic, of malicious traffic, that can happen without the customer ever having to know. And those capabilities, that Threat Insights capability is something that we also make available to our customers, so they can see what is happening to them coming from the internet and what is happening to the sector and what is happening globally. The inside out capability, the unified security management, is another example of how orchestration can be very powerful in a security sense. So as you probably are aware, we purchased Alien Vault a couple of years ago now, and we're integrating their security products into our platform. And what the unified security management capability does is it allows us to see things that are happening inside the network. So we can see malicious events that are happening inside your network or crossing the boundary of the network and actually automatically take action against them. So, firewalls are great, and security incident and event management tools are fantastic. But generally, they rely upon a human to notice that a thing has happened and figure out what the right response is, and then go take that response. Well, large amounts of that can be fully automated, right? If I see an attack on a certain port, well, why don't I just shut that port, right? And so that is what our USM capability is able to do, is to orchestrate those actions. We can reach in and make firewall changes to take action against the threats that we see coming across the network.